Okay. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Grace Chang. I am a manager with Deloitte International Tax, and I have the great honor to sit virtually with Elizabeth, associate partner at Aon. Um, she is also one of LLTF's on the advisory board of LLTF. She's very graciously offered to spend her lunchtime to speak with us about her story and hopefully give us some, you know, good stories that we can take forward in our careers. Um, so before we start, quick plug for the LLTF. We are a forum within the ABA tax section, hoping to advance the LGBTQ plus attorneys and support staff within the legal workspace, especially in tax. We're a relatively new forum. We formed roughly, actually a little less than 2 years ago. Thank you, Genevieve, for putting the listserv or the link to more information on LLTF in the chat. If you are not a part of our listserv, please feel free to join. So during for May meeting, I hope people are going to the May meeting. We will be having a booth over there. Please feel free to come and say hi. We're also doing 2 panels during the May meeting. Both will take place on Friday, May 3rd. The first one would be on how to implement sustainable DEI initiatives in the post-pandemic legal workforce. We will be focusing on the challenges within the legal workplace when implementing and addressing DEI issues. And the second one would be the synergy between tax, DEI, and ESG. We will be looking at how DEI and ESG approaches must work in tandem in order to I guess like cross over the boundary to overcome challenges within the workforce. Please, and I think Elizabeth, you're going to be on one of the panels as well, right?
I am, Grace, and I'm looking forward to that because I won't be talking about myself, so it'll be a little less daunting. But actually, I see one of my co-panelists has joined us here, Roberta Mann, and yeah, it's funny because some folks would hear DEI and tax and think they have nothing to do with each other, but DEI, ESG. We're gonna explain to you that they actually have a lot to do with one another. So tune in for that one, early May.
I'm personally very excited for it. That said, why don't we get started? So Elizabeth, thank you again for joining us. I'm gonna start with the easy questions first. So like, where are you from, and tell us more about your upbringing.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Well, and I'm pleased and honored to be addressing the group, and I guess I would say that I'm hoping that you can gain something. If something I say today is useful and helpful as you progress in your career, that would be very gratifying for me. I born and raised in New York. The accent comes out, especially when I visited. My family, I'm the first person to have had the opportunity to pursue higher education. So working class neighborhood, back then a lot of first generation folks, still is, just coming from different countries. That's the Bronx. But I did have my folks appreciated education. So even though they really didn't know what college involved, they were very committed that I should, as well as my siblings. Um, so, but I guess. Well, let me pause there and see where do you want to go, Grace, next?
Yeah. Oh, so while we're going, if anybody has any questions, feel free to um let us know either in the chat or just start speaking. I'm sure we'll be able to see you. But that said, we'll also have a Q&A in at the end. If there are anything that you want to know that I haven't covered or that we haven't covered. But back to your question. So I guess being a first generation, what inspired you to go to law school and what made you choose tax after going to law school?
Um, I'm not sure exactly because I didn't know what law school involved. I didn't really know what lawyers did, but there was something about that they would bring resolutions and I guess in my mind justice. And I thought that was a very valuable thing. Where I grew up and when I grew up, it was a tumultuous time. And it was present in the community, a lot of strife over interracial relations. To be candid about it, thankfully, that's mostly history. Um, so I think law school was always on my agenda, even though I didn't know what it involved. Um, and I think tax, it's funny, my community as a youngster, very blue collar traditionally, but my father, he aspired white collar. He wanted a professional, and he took himself into Manhattan and passed. They did aptitude tests back in the day, and got hired by one of the oldest banking institutions in America, frankly. And he ended up becoming a tax preparer for essentially wealthy individuals, trusts, and the like. And I would listen to him and his colleagues kind of swap stories about not their work per se, but the people they met. And I thought it was fascinating. And I think that probably and then so therefore I really wasn't daunted by tax. I know some lawyers say they went to law school because they don't like dealing with numbers and concepts like that. That wasn't me. I actually I don't shy away from numbers. I don't um, you know delve into them the way my colleagues when they're here, actuaries, so deep number crunching. And I'd say I add the words. That's the balance we have. So I guess that's trying to in a nutshell. I always knew I wanted to go to law school, and then tax. I guess the other thing I'd say about tax, it's very much substance. Um, there's not, you can try to pull things over on people, but it's really not going to work. and and I think I found that appealing. And I guess we can segue into um, from when I was young. Uh, I knew that Prince Charming wasn't going to be in my version of the fairy tale. I knew I was going to have to, I assumed, have the wherewithal to take care of myself. So, higher education, and then a field that people always need you. That's the way I felt about it. There's always taxes. So that I think that was another piece of what I found appealing about it. That I felt that if I worked hard, paid attention, did what I needed to do, I'd be able to take care of myself. And I'm pleased to report that it's been it's been a fascinating ride and perhaps even better than I imagined.
Yeah. Um, I think that definitely resonates with probably a lot of people on the call. And so after that, like how did your career start and how did you find your way to Aon?
Yeah, well, I certainly I didn't even know what um, pension consulting was. So, I'll offer that as people at the beginning of their career. You may find yourself doing something that you didn't even know what it was, and perhaps it didn't even exist. Um, I, I went to school in New York for both undergrad and law school. Wonderful schools, both upstate New York. Um, and so I had, and in the snow belt. So I'd had a lot of winters. And then I stayed on and did a clerkship with the appellate court in New York. Learned all sorts of New York law, um, which I maintain my license, but I haven't practiced in New York now for many, many years. Um, and I guess where I'm going is I decided at that point, after the clerkship was going to conclude, I was invited to stay on, but well, as much as I enjoyed it, it didn't hold that much appeal for more permanency. So I decided that I would pick up sticks and move to the San Francisco Bay Area. I had done a little bit of traveling earlier in school. I took a sabbatical and traveled on a shoestring. But of all the areas I visited in across the country, the Bay Area had a lot of appeal. Um, and I thought that was the juncture, having, finished my education and gotten the beginning of a resume. That was the time to, if you're going to pick up sticks, perhaps. So that's what I did. And my first job, other than the clerkships I had done, I had also done a district court clerkship. Um, the first lawyer job that was with the Internal Revenue Service, Chief Counsel's office. Um, and part of what was going on there is if you're licensed anywhere, and maybe people know this, but if you're licensed anywhere in the country, you can practice for Uncle Sam. So I had interviewed with other agencies, and but the real goal was to get to the Bay Area, and I forget, I may have told you this story, Grace, but I had kind of forgotten that I had put the application in. Sometimes the government moves a little slowly. Um, and they called me kind of out of the blue, and I realized they were calling from California because it was the evening, uh, on the East Coast. And I'm like, who's calling me at this hour? And would you come out for an interview? And I did. I flew out in the middle of February, um, at Syracuse Airport, and it's a wonderful time to visit the Bay Area, especially when you're leaving deep winter in upstate New York. And I said to myself, I more or less don't care what they ask me to do. If they give me a job, I'm taking it. And I flew back, and my car was under 3.5 feet of snow, so it underscored my commitment. So that's how I became a tax litigator, because that's what the way the chief counsel is structured. The folks doing the guidance and the regulations are principally in Washington D.C., or at least traditionally they were. Whereas the field offices handle the cases in the tax court. So that's what I did. Um, and oh, did you have is that a raised hand, Roberta?
It is, Elizabeth. I'm very excited to be doing the panel with you. That's going to be so much fun. But I'm a legal educator, and I want to know: did you take tax in law school, and did that inspire you at all?
Yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right. I took my law school had at the time, I think it was maybe three tax classes, basic, corporate, and then I something that was like they called it the wealth transmission process. it kind of integrated both the probate and the tax. And you're absolutely right that I'm sure that's what really launched the interest, because I felt it was like solving puzzles. And I find that, that's my happy place. So yeah, the education was quite influential. And
Thank you.
yeah, and I'll just say it. So when I decided to leave the government, because it's a natural segue, I guess, to say, and I'll go ahead and say it because I'm at this point in my life and my career. I had a blast working with the people I worked with at Chief Counsel's office. I enjoyed the work. It was very challenging to me. I mean, litigation, you're like, you're the gnat's eyelash over issues. And I got to work with, this is something I did want to share with folks. There were experienced lawyers in that office, superb lawyers. It was the same generation that Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think of the pioneers in the legal profession. And like, for instance, one of the colleagues, she graduated the top of her class out of a law school. And the interviews went, she was offered a legal secretary job, which I understand is what happened to Sandra Day O'Connor, and that's how she ended up in public service. So I got to work with those folks. So as far as, mentorship and really learning your way around, tax court litigation, it was superb. It was wonderful. But what happened? I felt like that the office, I was needing to become a bureaucrat, and that wasn't something that sit well with me, whatever I imagined it was. Also, litigation is demanding, and I noticed that was something also that was weighing on me. So I segue back to the education. I did some interviewing, and if I was going to move away from litigation, I came to understand that having the master's in tax would be very meaningful. And I had family in New York, and I had a niece and nephew at that point who were, like 5, 6 years old. So I went back to New York, and I went to NYU for a year, got the master's degree. Realized that I'm really a city kid. I like living in the city. And I had fun with my niece and nephew, and my niece who just had her first baby. So it's been a little while. But it was a wonderful experience, and that it was definitely worthwhile. It opened a lot of doors for me. And then I decided to come back to the Bay Area. New York holds a lot of appeal, but New York's got kind of a relentless pace. So I decided I should come back to the Bay Area, and I don't regret it. It's both wonderful places, and at least for the moment, they both have 2 baseball teams, and that's another more or less requirement for me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't.
Enough of my tangents. What else should we talk about, Grace?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, during our prep call, we didn't talk about how I didn't realize you were also a baseball fan. So,
well, I'm all enthusiastic. The women's basketball has concluded, so now my attention can turn to baseball, which is yeah, it's a love of mine from when I was young. It's funny because it's fun that my father is a rather taciturn person, but sports, and so that became I think that's part of it. It's that that connection, and we can always talk about sports.
nice. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to hijack this conversation into a baseball conversation or a sports conversation. But so I guess back to um, your work in the government. What are some lessons that you've learned that you were able to take with you to your next job, or take with you into the private sector?
Um, well, you know, it's it's it may seem obvious, but it's really underscored. Treat people respectfully, whether they're on your side of the table or on the other side of the table. Well, as a young woman lawyer, um, there were at least a few occasions where more seasoned, male litigators, um, it was clear they were trying to intimidate. Um, but I had wonderful colleagues. I had wonderful mentors, and and there's nothing that's going to inspire, your essentially your government officials to to um, to do right by, it's always, the representing the commissioner is actually a wonderful position because you never argue anything that you don't think is consistent with tax law. So, I'd say, getting a really solid grounding in that, learning to treat people respectfully, frankly, and collaboration. It's a very complex area, and we used to kind of jokingly talk about um, conferring with the national office about positions, and I would, little wise guy that I am, say, "Oh, we got to call the pointy heads," um, because we needed the official, and I learned a lot from folks like that. I mean that, how all sorts of different areas, but the brain trust in Washington, and wonderful folks who were very patient with someone. I remember talking to one of the chief actuary. That's how I ended up in benefits work. It was just happenstance, but I liked it. And the actuary was talking actuarialese to me, and I said, "Slow down, please, Jim. You're going to have to explain it to me, and then I have to explain it to the judge, who's not got the most patience with some of these things. So we have to really break it down." So it's a long-winded way of saying preparation is key, and I guess treat people with respect. Um, and then it's interesting, when I got into private practice, there were people who had recognized my work, even though I was no longer doing litigation. And I guess that another thing that I'd say, whatever you do, whether you stick with it, I didn't stick with litigation, but it's been an invaluable experience as far as advising clients. I was in private practice for a number of years, and we had the whole gamut of clients, but it was strictly employee benefits work. So that was wonderful. We were like our own little brain trust of sorts. Um, and 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 the fact that I could adopt the regulator's perspective, I think, also served me quite well. Well, people would say, "Well, what is the IRS thinking? How could they, write a rule like that?" And I'd say, "Well, I can explain to you what they think. You might think that they're, that they, it's inappropriate, but here's what the thinking is." And so I'd say that's another big advantage of having worked on that side for the period of time.
Um, so I guess going into more like in more personal and hard-hitting questions, um, during your career, what when did you come out, and did you have to mask before or after coming out?
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact that I relocated had to do with my knowing that I wasn't straight, and knowing that the Bay Area community was a place that's and continues to be, and part of what I love about the Bay Area is it is welcoming to all sorts of people, whatever your background, and it is genuinely embraced. So I guess what I'd say is that the world has changed in so many ways. But I would definitely didn't, I definitely was kind of quietly out. The people who got to know me well, and I think that's some of just my personality. But being in a community where it just didn't feel quite as daunting. And I think actually stepping away from where you grew up. My mother, God bless her, she would say to me, there's lesbians in Brooklyn. I said, I know, Mom. That was her way of wanting me, but there was that stepping away, I think, also, and it gave me, I don't know whether confidence is the right word, but it definitely, knowing that you're not straight and having to navigate the world. I'm thankful how, honestly, I will. It may seem tough still. It's a lot better. And I guess that's why I even agreed to do this, Grace, because it's a little awkward, but I'm hoping that if people can recognize that we are in a community, and we in all of the various aspects, and knowing that others are there, and even if it's metaphorically, have your back. I think that I know that's been meaningful in my life. And then I eventually, at some point, it, this is worth saying. I just, you kind of do yourself a disservice if you don't embrace your full identity. And I'm sure that, there are things in my past that if I had it to do over, that might be something. But I don't know that I don't think I knew that until I, more fully came out. And I mean, talk about like this is advertised, and so now however many of the 50,000 colleagues I have, whether they know me closely or not, I don't know how many of them are going to care, but it's a step, but it's a very, I'd say it's a very meaningful step for anyone to fully embrace who they are, because in subtle ways, that failing to do that, I think, influences what you do professionally. So I, even though it, I would just encourage people to consider it as professional development.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there were a lot of changes that you've seen, and thank you, Sheila, for the question. What are some of the most memorable changes made within the workplace that you've seen?
Well, yeah, I'd say that, well, for instance, Aon, well, part of why I get to be as active with the tax section. I mean, we're not, we're a consulting firm, risk management, human capital. The nitty gritty of the tax rules isn't really where we are. But I say I'm representing the company, and the company's like, fine, that's great. So it's and earlier in my career, I remember like the handful of companies, but that's many years ago. And now it feels like particularly large companies have genuinely embraced it. And I feel that sincerely. I know some people, think it's a kind of a box ticking exercise. But that's not been my experience. I think there's a recognition that bringing the diverse voices into, conversation with one another, you do come up with better solutions. So I feel that, that's been an enormous change from my perspective. Um, and I think there's, it's not only okay, but it's actually welcome. The diversity, and that certainly wasn't the case, earlier in my career.
So you've mentioned how, like, right now being proudly out and still representing the firm, and the firm's completely okay with it, even supportive. Um, that's a really, like, that's a huge step forward. But what are some additional changes that you would like to see within the workplace?
Well, admittedly, it's well, I'm in San Francisco, and and the town attracts people from all sorts of other places, candidly. And so that I could, rattle off the colleagues and different countries and 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 different backgrounds. And when I think of like the Minneapolis office, for instance, that's not the way that office, is populated, put it that way. And I almost wish that there were opportunities for folks, truthfully, in places like that. I'm not saying I'm going to relocate so that they can have more diversity in their office, but I think it would be it would be and it would be great if places that don't have representation from various groups could access it. And I do think, it's a silver lining, if you will, for that dreadful pandemic that we've got, that we can get together this way. I know a few years ago this would be very, kind of a peculiar way of meeting people. And then there's people you wouldn't meet because you're in different, you're just in different locations. But the fact that we can now meet, I look forward to more of that, and kind of cross pollinization, if you will, because I think once people get to know people, some of that, I think a lot of it is fear. Um, and you're not going to love everybody, but that's life. um,
Yeah. Um, so that is within the workforce, but because we're in the legal field, we're in a client facing profession. Sometimes we can't control what preconceived notions that the clients have. What or if they accidentally say something that's a little offensive. Do you have advice or examples on how to, um, I guess, still do our jobs properly, represent them, or do our jobs to the best of our abilities, while being able to call them out or call them in on their biases?
yeah, it's always going to be a challenge. I do think, for instance, I mean, the kind of, well, particularly as a woman, truthfully, I got more of the sexism stuff. Just, that's just the way it went, what happened. And so I guess where I'd say is I know I try to use humor to diffuse things. Um, and 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 it can be effective, particularly if someone um, it really isn't deliberately. I mean, I'm thinking back. I could tell the difference when opposing counsel was trying to intimidate me, and when opposing counsel was just kind of casually sexist. Um, different generation. And in the latter case, I would usually try to make a joke about the comment so that the person had the opportunity to more or less walk back from it. And then the ones who were doing it deliberately, in my head, it was like, okay, bring it. And I'm chuckling now. That obviously was the litigation context. The clients, and maybe I've just been fortunate. In private practice, it was principally Bay Area clients, and I can't say that I've encountered very much once I got experienced enough in the profession. I mean, I will offer this, that I do think tax is another. At the end of the day, the clients want answers. They want competent tax, advice. I don't think they really care. You could be a Martian. I don't think they really care. And, there might be other areas of legal practice where it doesn't play that way. But I think tax, if you know what you're doing. And now I'm principally dealing with, other professionals and in-house folks at large companies. And at least my experience, it's just not acceptable to be disrespectful to anyone for any reason. And the professionalism, that's another aspect of what I've really enjoyed about being in the tax profession. Ordinarily very, very, dignified, and people treat one another respectfully, at least in my experience. Um, it's funny, it reminds me, I saw a friend last night. I'll just mention it quickly because she's a lawyer, and she's a permanent clerk for uh, a district court judge, and she mentioned that the the lack of professionalism that is encountered in that setting. And it just reminded me, and I guess that's why I'm mentioning it, that my world is different. So I don't know that I have more to offer folks who are, facing, um, real ignorance or misbehavior.
And along the same lines, what advice do you have for people within the LGBTQ plus community, within the legal field or within the tax field, that feel who feel the need to mask, um, or who feel the need to not, or feel intimidated to bring their whole selves um, to the workplace?
Yeah. Well, everyone's going to have their own trajectory. I will underscore though that I do think you do yourself a disservice, and I mean that from my own experience. That if I had been able to um, be more fully out, I think it would have been valued. So I would encourage people to remain mindful of it, and kind of, I guess, pick their spots. When I volunteered to be on the board, I realized I was that, I went ahead and volunteered, and then I went, oh, now I have to come out to the 50,000 person company. and the person I directly report to isn't in the Bay Area, and like shorthand, I work well with him, and I'm quite fine. But I thought, so what I did first is I reached out to a couple of the women leaders that I had worked with here, and essentially gathered my allyship, if you will. So I would encourage folks, in their own space, or use us as a resource. If sometimes just talking through, and I wouldn't say that when I actually did, finally have that conversation, it was the smoothest conversation I've ever had. But I know I felt, more comfortable. And then everything went smoothly after that. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying, collect your allies, and I'd say we're here, and think about how to take it on. I mean, I'm laughing. Doing this was daunting to me. I'm not naturally someone who jumps for the podium, but I said to myself, it's important, and you've done other big things, and it's worked. So that would be my final, it's important, and you can do it, and we're here for you.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely true. Like a lot of times, you feel like it's important, but it's daunting. But being able having a good support system and collecting allies along the way, like you said, is definitely important. And it could go a long way.
Right, and if you can figure out tax law, you can do hard things.
That's for sure. Yeah, tax law is difficult. And I mean, in a way, that's doubling our work, right? Because tax law is difficult by itself, and then we have to figure out the human aspect of things. So that's double the work. So, I'm not sure if we have a lot of law students or people who are. So, do you have any advice? We'll get to Roberta's question in a bit. But do you have any advice for people, for students who are job searching, or experienced attorneys who are looking for a change of pace, and to find a place that is supportive, and how you found Aon, that is supportive to you as a person?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's not that I was looking. Well, I stepped away from private. I think of my career as 3 chapters, and there might be a 4th. Not sure. Yeah, and it wasn't. This is retrospective that I can see it. It was, and the first chapter, the years of the government, and I was enjoying the work, and as I mentioned, the mentorship from the women attorneys, and then I felt advocating for what we sincerely believe was the right result, and then I did private practice, and I stepped away for that, and I won't go into a lot of detail around this because it is quite personal. But I stepped away essentially to relocate, and then what I thought I was going to be doing didn't work out. This is personal, and I ended up being back looking for work during what they called the Great Recession, which is maybe a dozen or so years ago now, maybe a little bit more, 2009-ish. And firms weren't hiring. And I don't, I wanted something different. I wasn't sure. And it was actually someone who had gone to the NYU program, and she's a California gal. She's back in the Bay Area. And she said, oh, this the consulting, and it wasn't Aon at the time. It was one of the large pension consulting firms, which is now part of Aon. And I've come to learn what pension consulting is and lots of other things. So it was kind of happenstance in some ways. But what I realized is I get to deal with the rules, which I enjoy. But because of the role that Aon plays for its clients, I get to work on policy questions, and that's part of what I enjoy about going to the tax section meetings. So I guess what I'd say is, perhaps be open to serendipity, and then when something does captivate you, kind of run with it, if you will. I guess that's what I'd say to folks. And I don't, you mentioned comfort. I'm not sure it was a, I think for me it was I want intellectual challenges, and I want to be able to collaborate, and I want to feel, that we're working together on an enterprise. And at this point in my life, that's very important to me. And that's what I feel I'm able to do in this consulting role.
And finally, could you give us some style advice to the group here?
Oh, I know, Roberta. Well, thank you. I will share something that I think is kind of funny. Scarf, the Bay Area, the temperatures can fluctuate. I mean, it's within a narrow range. So, my friends back east say, who are you kidding? But this kind of stuff actually works nicely. And then just the layers. So believe it or not, it's a lot of practical. But thank you. That's a lovely compliment.
Does anybody else have any additional questions? Doesn't have to be questions, or just you want to share with the group.
Yeah, feel free to speak up if you're comfortable.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me? Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
Yes. Hello.
I just want to say that I'm really appreciative of the Zoom call and everything you've had to say. I just wanted to say my thanks and whatnot. And then also, I came in a bit late, so I'm not sure if you've already touched on it, but for situations where you feel like you being targeted or discriminated against in like a professional setting outside of like the usual pathways, how would you see that you should handle those situations, like if you file a claim or like something like that and you're in fear of being retaliated against or other such things? Like, how do you feel like you would personally like navigate those situations, if you have any idea or know of any personal anecdotes from other colleagues?
Yeah, I know I've never, I've never followed, like filed a claim or things like that. I guess what I'd say is I would work on my set the settings I was in, such that they worked for me, or I would leave. But I do recall the law firm I was with, and it was a colleague, and she raised a claim, and I guess in retrospect, and this is perhaps my personality. I mean, believe it or not, I did litigation, but I don't embrace contentiousness. It was the woman ended up leaving the firm, and I think that was the best result. And I understood exactly where she was coming from, and I understood why she brought the claim she brought. But I know, for me, I would want to balance how important is it to vindicate, and sometimes it is, or would your energy be better spent finding a place where you really can be yourself and appreciated for that. And I guess the other thought I'd have is, if you are facing something that you think is, whether it's retaliation or just exclusion, and what all of the various, I would try to talk to allies, and both for insights into what you're experiencing, and then thoughts about how to deal with it. For instance, preparing for this, I've talked to a number of folks in my circle, and I've appreciated, the thoughts that they've shared, and I realize that's different, but I think it's still good advice to reach out to others. It can be, I do think it's valuable, both for even articulating what your concerns are, and then and getting feedback on how to deal with them. I hope that's helpful to you.
Yes, it was. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
If there's nothing else, last final plug is please visit our the website, the first one within the chat. There's a full list of the leadership board and the advisory board. Elizabeth is a part of our advisory board. If everybody who's on the board is doing this because we care about the community and we want to advance DEI, and also because we've also received a lot of help from people who came before us, and we want to pass it forward. So please reach out if you have any questions, or if you have thoughts, concerns, or if you're interested in more interested in the forum, or participating within the forum. Please feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And yeah, with that, I think that is it. So thank you so much to everybody who joined. Thank you especially to Elizabeth for spending time and being vulnerable. I know this is daunting.
But we did it, Grace. We did it.
Yeah, we did it. And thank you for everybody who brought up questions, especially the hard-hitting ones, like style advice. So yeah, so thank you again, and happy Wednesday.